So years ago, I was playing percussion in this world music band. It was just a little side project for fun. It was with friends. And we were asked by a friend of a friend to play at this elementary school. And so this was some sort of elementary school function. We knew people at the school. We went and played. And so like we did whenever we played, we set up. When it was time for us to play, we went up there and bang, we just like kicked it off with a tune, high energy tune. Sock it to them. The vibe, the response that we got was that people thought that was arrogant to actually start playing without saying anything first. Other places, if we were at a festival or a concert or something like that, it would have been perfectly normal and expected that you walk out and you play something and then you start talking. Then you say hello and then go from there. In this context, at this school, it was weird to walk out and not introduce ourselves, introduce the music that we were playing, say hello, because it was what? Because it was kids or because, I don't know. But it was a fascinating little experiment because it's so different in different places. So how do you introduce the music that you're going to play, depending on who you're playing to, what the situation is, and what do you actually say about it? In that moment, should we have said something about the music, something about ourselves, something about the situation or the scene that was going on? This is the challenge of a musical introduction and how to introduce your pieces, what to say before you play. And that's what this video is going to be about. How do you craft musical introductions? When do you say? What do you say? How do you say it? How do you prepare that? How do you polish it? All of these things. So this is musical introductions. But before we dive in, take a moment and subscribe to this channel if you will. You can find the button below and click the bell for the notifications. So why would you introduce your pieces? Why not just go out and play? A lot of people do just go out and play and don't say anything. And that is a particular style of doing it. Depending on the situation, the atmosphere, that can be the best choice. But also, there are reasons to introduce your pieces, to say something before you play a piece or between your pieces. Why would you do this? Well, one, you can just connect with your listeners, to the people there. They can get to know you, they can feel like they know you, they can like you, and if they can trust you, then they can relax and enjoy the music more. If they're nervous for you, they're not going to really listen and enjoy the music. They're just gonna sit there hoping that you don't mess up because they fear for you, and that's not what you want. It's instead, you actually want them comfortable enjoying the music. It is about them, after all, and not about us as players. So that's one of the things that we can connect with people by doing it. You can also just help them have a positive experience. You can give them a way into the music by enabling them to access a particular emotion or series of thoughts in their own experience that can help them enjoy the music. And then thirdly, you might educate them. And this maybe you will, maybe you won't, depending on the scene. This may be a good idea or not, but you could teach them something as well. But do you really need to do this? Well, no, you don't. You can just go out and play and don't say anything. But there are possibilities and there are opportunities in talking. So if you're really uncomfortable and it's going to mess up your playing if you talk, well then don't worry about it and just don't do it. But the other way to do it is to actually practice, is to write a really good introduction. This is what this video is about, is to write a really good introduction and memorize it and practice it and polish it so that whenever you play for someone, it is part of the performance. It rolls off your tongue very easily. It sounds natural and improvised, and it's just part of the performance. It's easy for you. It builds your confidence as a player, and it also gives the listener something interesting to think about. So here's the overall game plan for our introduction. So first, and we'll dig deeper into each of these, plan it first off. So brainstorm a bunch of ideas. First, don't choose your first idea because it's probably not your best idea, but plan it, write it out word for word, actually get your grammar correct and everything else, write it, then memorize it word for word, practice it in front of the mirror, in front of a camera, in front of other people, and then lastly, forget it. So then now that you've practiced it, you've memorized it, it's very polished, then you can forget it. That way, whenever you do speak it, Little words will be different in there, but the basic structure and what you're saying will all be there, but it will sound more natural and improvised, like it's just coming up right in that moment. And that's more endearing to a listener than something that sounds like you're reading it off of a page and you're just visualizing in your head and just reading the words. Instead, if you practice it and then memorize it and forget it, then it'll all be there, but it'll sound like you're just making it up. Okay, that brings us to a point, and that is that you have to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? Like I told you about the elementary school, the kids, that's a particular scenario. And so the way that you talk to second graders and third graders is going to be different than if you are at an academic function and you're playing a recital at a university and everybody's music students and music faculty. That's going to be different. Likewise, if it's your family and they're all sitting around with a can of Budweiser, with like rib sauce on their shirt, that's going to be a different scene as well. It's just going to be a different atmosphere. What you say is going to be different. So it's really important that you know who it is that you're talking to and you craft your message directly for them so that they can enjoy your music better through the introduction and it makes sense for them. This will affect the words that you use or don't use. It will affect the how long it is. It will affect everything about it. So it has to be, if you write it for just one person, if you just get that person in your head and say, this is who I'm introducing this to, then it's like sharing something with a friend. You just sit down and say, oh, I want to play you this song, and here's a little something about it. And then ideally it's for them, and it makes sense for them. It doesn't use words they don't understand. It doesn't dumb it down. It doesn't dress it up and smart it up. So it's just right. Well, now the $1 million question is, what do you actually say in your musical introduction? What do you talk about? What do you share and what do you not share? Again, know your audience, but there are a bunch of different ways you can go, and here are a few. So first off, basic information about the composer, about the creator of the work. And this could be really dry, like the dates they lived. Johann Sebastian Bach was born in 1685. Okay, that's sort of interesting, but it's not really interesting. Like, who really cares? However, if they've never heard of Bach, then you could be like, yes, they lived a long time ago, and that might be, so this music is from a long time ago. That could be interesting. But you could say information about the composer. Fun facts are oftentimes just more fun. That's why they're called fun facts. So let's say Erik Satie, you're going to play Gymnopédie by Erik Satie. You could share fun facts about Satie. Erik Satie was nocturnal for a time. He ate only beige food, and he was known to carry a hammer around under his coat. Those are interesting things. That's something that I can make pictures in my mind with. It's funny. It's just it's quirky. And so then as you go into the music, then you have something to kind of think about. You can think about him walking around with a hammer, ordering some beige food while you're listening to Gymnopédie. You can also set the context of the piece. The historical context, was it written during the American Revolution or during some other event? What was going on in history, where that was happening? What was going on in history other places? Like if you're in the United States, what was going on in Europe at that time or in Japan or something? So the world context can also be interesting just to frame it. If somebody has a particular knowledge about something, you can bring it back to something that they know, if you know what they know. You can also talk about the setting in which the piece was composed, and so the context of the piece itself. For instance, Antonio Lauro wrote the Suite Venezolana while he was in jail for his political beliefs, and many of the themes in the third music are actually snippets of popular music from the day. If you were Venezuelan at that time, you would know all these tunes. And so you would those little melodies would pop out at you and you'd recognize them, and that would be fun for you. We don't know those songs, so really we wouldn't recognize them, but you can point them out to a listener. You could even play some little themes and snippets as well for them. And so that can bring them into the music as well. Likewise, if there are any famous performances of the piece, you could set the context that way. Just anything around it so that the piece exists or the composer exists in time, in a place, in a context. Another idea is to share what people can actually listen to in the music. So the theme, if there's a particular theme that goes through and comes back and is treated in different ways, you can play that little theme for somebody and show them. In that way, whenever they hear it, it'll pop up and they'll say, oh, there it is. It gamifies the music a little bit for them. It gives them some familiarity with it. And so then they have an into the music. If there are musical effects, there's berimbau. Some kind of musical effect, you could show them how to do that. You could, or if there's any kind of sound that they're not used to hearing, you could show them that sound, tell them how it's made, and talk about it a little bit. And that's interesting. So then whenever they're seeing it, they know a little bit of something. And so that makes it more interesting for them. Likewise with the music theory, if they know music theory, then you can talk about music theory. If they don't, then it's best not to. Don't tell your cousin Bubba about the dominant tonic relationships. If he doesn't know anything about that, it's just going to go over his head and make him feel angry at you for being too hoity-toity for him or something. So again, know your audience. But if you do want to share some music theory with people, then you can. If there's something interesting that happens, or if the piece is unique in a way, if it's doing something different than had been done before, using new harmonies or new ways of writing, then that could be really interesting for people. Especially if it's hard to listen to music. If you're going to play this really, if you're going to play music that kind of hurts people's ears, then it's really nice to tell them why it's interesting and share how they can enjoy it or what they can listen to in it so that they can appreciate it in some way, so that they can understand and appreciate it. Otherwise, what are they going to do with it? It's just you're throwing them into the deep end and they don't know how to swim. So you can help them by explaining something to them so that they can enjoy the music more. You can also share any musical narratives. And so if there is a story of the music, for instance, Leo Brouwer's Black Decameron, El Decameron Negro, it follows the story of an African warrior who also liked to play the harp, but the harp players and the warriors were of different social classes, and so the village kicks them out and he and his lover have to flee and they're exiled and they have to go through these scary places and then there's like her side of the story. So there's this whole narrative to the suite of music, and that is really interesting, and it really makes the piece, to be able to know that story makes the piece so much nicer to listen to. It makes it more interesting. We can make more images in our head from it. We can recognize, he's using this device musically to show that. Another direction that you can go here, another avenue to introduce a piece, is a personal story. So I had a teacher for a spell, Scott Kreitzer in Portland, Oregon. He's a great guitarist, and he played an arrangement of Nessun Dorma by Puccini that was made famous by Luciano Pavarotti. So before he would play this arrangement, he would tell this story of his dad, who was a working class, blue-collar guy, big tough guy, but he loved Pavarotti's version of this, and he would just lay in the floor and listen to this record on full blast with tears streaming down his face, and it was just this amazing story. And so Scott would tell this story, and it was so powerful. And then he would play the piece, and it didn't even matter how well he played the piece because everybody was having their own experience based on his father's experience and based on this image. And so it really brought the emotion much higher than if he would have just played it or if he would have talked about the music theory or the history. It was just a personal story can really bring a piece alive if it's a good story and if it works. Another avenue is to tie the piece into current themes in the news or in society, in the culture. And I'm not really a fan of this. So if I'm going to see music, and so this is just my opinion, if I'm going to see music, I don't want to think about the news. I don't want to think about social issues and problems in the world. I just want to enjoy some music. But a lot of people love this. A lot of people love bringing gender, race, nationality, politics, the environment. They love bringing these into the music and making that And so it tags on to people's larger emotions around a particular issue. And you can do that, but really ask yourself, is that what you want? Is that the experience you're wanting to share with people? I personally would rather have an experience away from all of that, as an escape from all of that. As I'm seeing music, I kind of want an escape from all of that and just to have a deeply human experience, but that's just me. And so know that those are really also they can be very powerful ways to introduce a piece and to provide context for a piece and why it matters now and all of this. That's a choice you'll have to make. For any of these, you can also use visual aids. So you can use multimedia. You could play a film clip or have some slides. You could have an object that you shared. You can have some sort of help with other modalities of experience. Visual, auditory, play an audio clip of something, tactile by showing an object. You can bring in other senses by doing this, and you can introduce these pieces. It becomes a different production when you do that, but you can do it, and it can be very effective and very powerful to turn your show into a multimedia production in that way. All right, so those are some ways in which you can really enter. So brainstorm as many ideas as you can with that. So again, just to list these one more time, if you're taking notes, then here's the cliff notes. And that is, you can say composer information, so make notes about the composer. You can set the context of the piece or the composer or the genre or the style. You can share something about the music itself. So the music theory, the style, an effect or a technique, a musical narrative, anything like that. You can share a personal story of your own or somebody else's, and so a very human-based story. You can also do a modern cultural context, so you can say how it relates to modern culture or society. And if you would like to, you can also bring in other visual or auditory aids so that you can enrich the experience in that way. So now let's talk about how to write this and what to actually do in the process of creating a musical introduction. So to begin with, and we've alluded to this, ideally brainstorm a bunch of ideas. Do a bunch of research on the composer, learn all about them as much as you can. Learn about the piece, the style, the time period, the historical context. Learn all about this, and so that you can find interesting stories and facts to share and then list these out. You might actually have a few different ones that could work in different contexts. So if you're playing for kids versus playing for your family or for friends versus playing for some other only guitarist at the Guitar Society meeting or at a school or whatever it is, pick out different ones that work. So brainstorm a bunch of ideas. Ideally, get 10 or 20 or 30 ideas so that you can really hone down and cherry pick the very best ones. Next, draw out a basic outline. And so this doesn't have to be fancy, just what are you going to say? So step 3 is to write it out. Use your pencil or pen, write it on your computer, actually put down the words in order. You can hone this, it's something to work with, so get it in, make it clear, write it out, use sentences and punctuation and grammar, and just make it actually a written piece of text. When you're writing it out, try to avoid jargon. Unless you are in an academic setting, don't use academic words. Don't expect anybody to know the big music words, what an arpeggio is or what sonata form is or something like this. Just don't expect people to know anything. So keep it really clear. Even if you are speaking to an academic crowd, it's a breath of fresh air to actually speak clearly. So you can really, if you're really clear on your ideas, then you'll be ahead of the game. Then after you have it written out, then edit it and edit it and edit it and edit it over and over until it's really clean and polished. Kevin Kelly said, if you want something done, do it. If you want something done well, redo it and redo it and redo it. And so really writing is an editing process. Your first draft is probably going to be messy. Your sentences will be too long. It will be unclear. The order of the things, if you've done a good outline, then at least that should be good. It's going to be needing some heavy editing. And so do that work. Do the editing to make it really nice and do it over and over. Read it out loud, record it, listen back to it. if your mind wanders, take note of that and change that spot. So do some good editing on it. So one really common question here is, how long should this be? And that's going to depend. We speak about 140 words per minute. So that's something that you can go. I mean, it could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more, but it's a good average to just think about is about 140. So if you want to speak for a minute, then that's about 140 words. So depending on the context, it could be shorter or longer. In the folk scene, it's common to tell long, rambling stories between songs that may or may not have anything to do with the piece itself. I've seen Leo Kaki tell these long, rambling stories that are fascinating and charming, and I'm hooked on every word, and they don't really have anything to do with the piece, or there's this really thin thread that he'll tie the piece to at the very end, but it's part of the show. The story is part of the show, or whatever he's talking about becomes part of the show. And that's part of what you're there for. It's just a night of entertainment. And part of the entertainment is playing, and part of the entertainment is the talking. So that's one type of scene. Another is, I was recently watching a video of Pavel. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his last name. But he was playing, and he would just look up and say, Paganini. And then we would start playing the next beat. It was less than 1 second between two pieces. And he just would spit out the name of the composer if it changed, and then he was just right on to the next. And it worked for that particular setting, wherever he was at a festival or something. He had a short amount of time to play, and he was going to get it all of the music that he could in there, and it worked for that. So completely different. And of course, you could just not say anything. So depending on the scene, then it could be shorter or longer. You can also have different variations of your introduction to where you have the long version and the short version, to where you can you could cut parts out. If you wanted it shorter, you could add parts in if you wanted it longer. And so it's nice to have that in your pocket so that you can choose, depending on how it feels in the room that day, how much you say about it. Regardless of how long it is, it's a really good idea to treat it as part of the performance. So a lot of times people will do it as an afterthought. They've spent months working up this 3-minute piece, this 5-minute piece. They've spent how many hours on this piece learning this, but then the introduction, they won't put any time at all into, and they'll just do it off the cuff and say, this is it. And that creates this imbalance. It creates a difference in quality from one moment to the next. If you want to be playing this really nice piece, if you're going to say something, then figure it out ahead of time, at least the gist, and have it somewhat polished, especially if you're not that comfortable talking in front of people. If you have a problem talking in front of people, then practice it and rehearse it so that you can feel comfortable with it. And it might be that because of that, you keep it short, and that's great. If you're nervous, you shouldn't be talking a long time, because then you'll convey that nervousness to people, and that's not what you want for your music, because then they're going to be nervous going into the listening, and that's not what you want for them. So anything that happens on stage is part of the show. Even if the stage is the corner of your living room where you happen to be sitting, as people sitting around, it's still, anything that happens there is part of the show. If you make a sound, that's part of the show. Whatever you say is part of the show. If you fall down, that's part of the show. There is no hiding in that moment. And so craft that for people. It doesn't mean that they have to know that you did, but if you do, then it'll just be a nicer overall delivery. So in a moment, we'll talk about some speaking tips for actually delivering this. But first, where in your program do you need to introduce and where do you not? And this depends on the length of your program, who you're talking to or who you're playing for, and a number of different things. Also, it depends on the music. So if you are playing just 1 or 2 tunes, then just keep it short and get into the playing. If you don't have very much time, if you're at an open mic, for instance, or something like this, then just say a few words and then play your tune, because you don't have a ton of time. However, if you have 5 minutes and your piece is only 2 minutes, well, then take your time and just give a really nice introduction. Why not? Use it as practice. But in general, If you don't have very much time, then keep it short. If you're playing like a full program, let's say that you're playing an hour of music, then it could be that you come in, you play one piece, and then you speak, maybe introduce a set of music, and then before the set's out, you might say something just before the last tune of the set, and then you can bracket it in that way so that you're just speaking at these kind of pillar moments throughout the program, and you can choose where those are. Likewise, if you're playing a big suite, it's nice to say something before the entire suite, but then don't speak between the different pieces. If you're playing a bunch of small incidental pieces, or I call them fluffy pieces, a former teacher of mine called them fluff, like Brazilian tunes that are just kind of light and poppy, and you're playing a set of these, then maybe say something before the set, but not between each one. If the music isn't very serious, then don't make a big deal out of it. Just play them. Likewise, as we said earlier, if the music is difficult to listen to, then take some time and help the listener to enjoy the music more by giving them something to some way to understand it, some way in, a doorway into the music. If you're playing them some Bartok or something, then actually give them something to where they can latch onto, and they're not just adrift in this sea of chaotic notes. Whatever it is, it's best to decide before you start playing, before you enter into the performer's chair, walk out onto the proverbial stage, be it a real stage or just the living room stage. It's best to decide beforehand so that you're not wondering between each piece, should I talk now? Should I say something here? Ideally, you don't have to ask that question on the stage. Instead, decide ahead of time so that you can just relax. You know, whenever I finish this piece, then I'll talk, then I'll play this piece, then I won't talk, and then I'll play this, and then this, and then I'll talk. So you know exactly where you'll speak, so that way you can just relax and play and do your bit. So to that end, I'm going to now share some speaking tips with you for when you've got your thing, you've written it out, you've memorized it, you've videoed it and said it for other people, you've practiced it, you've said it to the cat tons of times, and now you are in a situation and you have to do it. Here are some tips for speaking whenever you're doing your musical introductions. So first off, make eye contact or pretend to. It's in a large room, you can look over people and that kind of gives the effect. You can also turn your head like this, even if you're in a small room or it's just a couple of people, just glance and just make some eye contact. It is so nice for people to feel like they are being spoken to directly, as opposed to just watching. It engages them. So eye contact is powerful. If it freaks you out, then don't do it. And don't hold eye contact too long with somebody, because that will freak them out. The next is to smile, even a small smile. Don't do a really big grimace. I've seen people do this when they're really nervous, but then they smile anyway, and so it looks like, say cheese. It looks like the family portrait where the kid just smiles. Don't overdo it, but a small smile, just even the corners of your mouth, will relax you, and it'll just trigger your nervous system to relax a little bit. And so it's really nice to just smile a little bit. Speak clearly. Ideally, don't mumble. Slow it down. Typically, whenever we get in front of people, if we're nervous, we speak too fast. I'm really guilty of this oftentimes. But slow it down and speak very clearly, and that will help people to understand. It'll also give them time to process what it is that you're saying. And to be more engaging, you can vary the pitch and the tonality of your voice. There's different things that you can do. You can go up high when you're talking about something and it makes it sound more exciting, or you can go very low and quietly, and then that gives another effect. So you can vary up and down the volume, the pitch, the tonality, all of these. You can use hand gestures. A lot of people really understand more when you use more hand gestures. If you say something and wave your hands around, they're going to understand it more. So if you're a gesturer, you can use some gesture. And if you're not a gesturer, then you can find just a couple of little ones that you can do at different times. You can practice it and just give that little gesture, and that can just help the overall appearance. If you're using a microphone, here are a couple of microphone tips for you. So first off, speak into the microphone. Don't wave your head around and be talking this way and then here and then this. It'll change the volume. So just speak into the microphone. The second tip is don't bring attention to the microphone. Is this thing on? I don't normally use a microphone. I'm nervous with the microphone. All this kind of talk, just skip all of that and just pretend like it isn't there. It's not interesting for people to hear you talk about the microphone. So just don't mention the microphone. So again, keep your head forward, speak into the microphone, and don't talk about the microphone. All right. Well, that's a lot that we have already gone through, but let's talk about polishing your musical introduction. So how do you get it better with time? And so first off, memorize it. Memorize it word for word, practice it. Don't assume that whenever you're there that you will just automatically know it just because you've done it. Chances are, if you get nervous in front of people, then you're going to completely go blank. And so it needs to be memorized. It needs to where it is a thing. And to where whenever you think this piece, that just pops right out of there. So have it memorized. You'll have a much better chance of performing it well if you memorize it. And the way to do that is you write it out, you do edit it, you do all of these things and you practice it. So practice as much as you can giving the introduction. Do it to the mirror, as we've said, to other people, record it. Video is a really great tool for your practice in general because that can show you what's working and what's not. Also for your body and your technique and how you're using yourself. And it can also, for your introductions, help you get used to delivering it on the spot. The camera is almost like a group of people. You turn the camera on and there is this idea that I've only got one time to do it. I've got to do it right the first time. And that is like a performance. And so prop up your phone or turn on your computer cam and here it is. Walk in, sit down, or stay standing, however you like, and say it. Say the introduction. And then play the first couple of notes. And do that a few times, watch it back, and practice, practice, practice. When you're comfortable, do it for friends and family. You can even tell them, I'm practicing introducing this piece. Do you mind? And that way it doesn't take them very long. You can also play the full piece if you want to, or you can just say, hey, let me play this for you. And then don't tell them that you're practicing the introduction, but actually give the introduction and then play the piece. And then see what you think. You could also video while you're doing that because then that's even more pressure and that's a great practice. And then it's important as you do this that you release it, that you don't get baggage, that you don't let yourself get too nervous about the introduction part and just know that if you've done this work, it will be better than if you hadn't have done this work. So even if it wasn't great or if you cringe whenever you see yourself or whenever you hear your voice on recording or something, it's okay. Just release it all. Let it just be fine. Know that you've done the good work. Do what you can. And then continue to focus on your music and your practice. Well, let's now say that it's after the show. You've played. You've introduced your pieces. Everything has happened. So then take a moment and reflect on how it went. If you have a recording, watch it back, but we oftentimes don't. But just take note, what was comfortable, what was not. Did you trip over your words at any point? Chances are the mistakes will speak much louder than the things that you did right in your memory. That's just how we're wired. But you can just think about, if I was to do it again, what would I do differently? Is there a way to improve it? Was I as comfortable as I would have liked? Was I stiff? Could I have done more hand motions? Were my hand motions stiff and so I would rather not do those next time? You can just think about anything that you can so that you reflect on the experience and you take that going forward and you just improve it, little 1% each time you do it. Well, all right. If you're still here, hats off to you because this is a lot of information about musical introductions. And so I hope that it is to prove useful for you. The main thing is that you just do the work on it. Thank you so much for watching. Best of luck with your introducing your pieces. Know that it's a work in progress. It's okay if it's not perfect. But ideally, we just help people to enjoy our music more. We invite them in to the wonderful world of this beautiful music that we play on this beautiful instrument that we play. And ideally, we can just share something with them that helps them to have a great experience so that they're eager to listen again, or they just enjoy it for the one time. And that's just great as well. The whole point of a musical introduction is just to help the listener to enjoy the music more. So if you would like to, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and click the bell for the notifications so that we can do it again. And again, best of luck, and thanks so much. Bye-bye.